Hey, Adam, did you know that the famed golfer Arnold Palmer was not only the best golfer on the planet, arguably, some may say, but he was also a Coast Guard member?
I thought Arnold Palmer was just like half tea and half lemonade.
Yes, and such a delightful beverage. You are not wrong.
It extends beyond that. This is mind blowing.
Yeah, actually, Arnold Palmer wasn't just a really tasty drink. There was a person the drink was named after who happened to be a really great golfer and a Coast Guard veteran, most importantly. So he served from 1951 to 54. He was a lifeguard at Cape May, New Jersey, and then a photographer. Thank you. I was also a photographer, as I've said ad nauseum. But he was a photographer at the Cleveland East Pierhead Lighthouse in Cleveland, Ohio, which seems strange because I thought Ohio was landlocked. Maybe not. Maybe it's got one of those Great Lakes up there. Anyway, so he said of his military service, and not the drink, Arnold Palmer himself said, "I'm very proud of the fact that I was in the Coast Guard. The knowledge that I gained, the maturity that I gained in the Coast Guard made me a better person. The military isn't just about restrictions," which it is, Arnold. "It's learning experience. It's a very important for that our young people have the opportunity to learn and to know themselves a little better," which I would agree. "I think the military helps put that in the right perspective." And I would agree with that also. What do you think about you, Adam? Do you agree?
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. Sounds like got some good insight from his time in the Coast Guard. But I do wonder how he found time to practice his golf game, being out on the water.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to figure out. Hey, Alphas, let's get this podcast started. 4.
This is the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
They call me crazy cause I'm facing all my giants. They try to scare me into thinking I can fight it. They tell me I should never even think of trying. But that's just me, I'm gonna live out in defiance.
Welcome, Alphas. Our co-host Joe Worley is away at a macrame convention in Chicken Bristol, Illinois. But Stacy and I will do our best to host a great show for you today in his absence. And if you don't know what macrame is, it's adjacent to the knitting family of activities in the area of yarn. Our guest today, Adam Popp, is a 12-year Air Force veteran who deployed to both Iraq and Afghanistan. In 2007, while serving as an EOD team leader in Afghanistan, he was injured in a blast that resulted in an above-the-knee amputation of his right leg. During a decade of recovery and training, Adam has trained to become an elite athlete and a certified peer mentor trainer who helps other amputees and individuals with disabilities to successfully pursue athletic and other personal goals. But before that, let's talk about what we found on LEGIONTOWN this week.
Yeah, Adam, I got a great story for you. Frederick R. Bedell Jr. of American Legion Post 103 in Douglaston shared a LEGIONTOWN, USA note about Pearl Harbor World War II survivor who just died at the age of 102 by the name of Lou Conter. He was on the USS Arizona when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. My great uncle and my grandfather, both also Pearl Harbor survivors. The stories go around the family that, they were getting ready for church. Their ship was in dry dock. And so they missed getting bombed, but were definitely part of the recovery process. Not just fighting off the Japanese attack wherever they could, but were in the water pulling bodies off and trying to rescue as many as they could. But I remember distinctly when I was a little girl, I noticed that my grandfather had a little ink peeping out around his wrist. And so I kind of went up there and pushed the sleeve back a little bit, revealing a bunch of anchors up his arm. But I remember saying, like, what are these? And I could see this sort of, 30-mile stare that one gets. And him saying, yeah, each anchor represents one of my friends who died at Pearl Harbor. And let's just say he's got anchors from wrist to elbows on both arms. Definitely had an impact on his life and my great uncle's life. At the age of 6, though, you really don't know what that means. And 20 years, down the road, after I joined the service myself, I wasn't 26. I'm terrible at math. You guys get it. But anyway, later on, when I had my own military experience, I could better appreciate what my grandfather was sort of remembering in that moment. And I definitely have a deep appreciation for all Pearl Harbor survivors. Lou Conter, 102, that's incredible. Thank you for your service. And apparently, according to reports, Lou not only survived Pearl Harbor, but he was kind of a hero on the day. And he survived the bombing of the USS Arizona. And there are reports that he tried to save others while the ship was actually being bombed. So Lou, rest easy. And until Valhalla, thank you for everything. And Mr. Bedell, thank you for sharing Lou's story on LEGIONTOWN. Don't forget, if you have a story, be sure to write it in. Check out LEGIONTOWN on American Legion website.
Okay, Alphas, please stick around and we'll be back to chat with Adam Popp right after the break.
As a veteran, you've done more than your fair share of providing support. Now it's our turn. Introducing the WellCare and the American Legion Partnership and the WellCare Medicare Advantage Plan. They give you more support, more access, and more benefits in addition to your VA benefits. Visit wellcareforveterans.com today or call 844-917-1165. Ohana Health Plan, a plan offered by WellCare Health Insurance of Arizona, Inc. New Mexico dual eligible special needs plan members. As a WellCare by Allwell DSMP member, you have coverage from both Medicare and Medicaid. Medicaid services are funded in part by the state of New Mexico. New Mexico Medicaid benefits may be limited to payment of Medicare premiums for some members.
All right, Alphas, today we're doubling down on our supply of Adams. We're joined by Air Force combat veteran and elite endurance athlete and trainer, Adam Popp. Adam, welcome to the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Well, Adam, welcome to the show and thank you for your service. I was Air Force too, but you don't come across as sort of the military adjacent, military light type. Not from everything that I've read anyway.
Okay, tell me more. What makes you think that?
Oh, no. Just from everything that you went through in the military, but also most importantly, your post-military career. But I really want to kind of back up a little bit and have you tell us where you're from originally and how you went about choosing the Air Force of all branches.
Yeah, sure. It is an interesting story. I grew up in southern Indiana near Louisville, Kentucky, just across the border. I was 18 and getting ready to graduate high school, and I didn't have a ton of direction or knew what I wanted to do next. And I visited some schools, Purdue and Indiana, and a few others. And I knew that probably wasn't the right direction at the time. And I started talking to some of my family members who served in the military. So specifically, my grandfather was in the Army. I had a cousin who was in the Air Force, and then another cousin who was married to an Army soldier. And basically what I took away from that conversation was from 2 Army people and an Air Force person was don't go in the Army.
You got that right.
Join the Air Force. But in all seriousness,
as an Army officer, I can vouch for that.
And then of course the career field I chose always worked with the Army or other services. So I kind of got the worst of both worlds in the sense that I got picked on for being in the Air Force and always had to spend time with the Army and live in those conditions anyway. So
same. Yeah.
But yeah, so that was 97 before, September 11th. I didn't really know at the time what I was getting myself into by choosing EOD. And my cousin who was in the Air Force was kind of talking to my mom and was like, oh no, you're going to let him like go that route. And anyway, long story short, yeah, I ended up in my first unit in Japan in 98. And then 3 years later, September 11th, I was in Turkey, and a few years later, I deployed on my first combat deployment doing the EOD mission in Baghdad, Iraq.
Well, awesome, Adam. It's great to have you on the show today. And so, as you're saying, as a 12 Force Air Force EOD combat vet, the EOD community is actually very special to me. And also here, your family of military service kind of influencing you. So my older brother was a Special Forces Green Beret, and as the breacher for his team, he carried out the majority of his EOD related tasks.
Yeah, sure.
And Yeah, he was medically retired in 2014 for TBI and PTSD from injuries sustained in combat, and in and around concussive blast waves, as like the line of your profession.
Right.
And interestingly enough, he was only knocked unconscious one time, so it's not necessarily that you have to be knocked unconscious, but it's just being around those concussive blast waves, as a means of your profession. Like my cousin was also a Navy EOD, and he was attached to DevGru, SEAL Team 6. He was also medically retired due to injuries sustained in combat. So the toll that war takes on the individual and the collective is massive, as you know, and the EOD community maybe even more so than the rest. So just to put this in perspective, your job was to be in and around explosives for a living. And to
Yeah.
me, that's just a whole nother level of incredible to do that job. So I was wondering, could you tell us a little bit about what life was like as an EOD operator for you before your injury, and what it was like for the first 18 months after? Like, how did you navigate that life-changing event?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, I got to Japan, Misawa, Japan, and my first duty station in '98. And a lot of it was training at the time. We did a lot of like simulated wartime, like field training exercises, mainly around the Northern Korea mission at the time. So it's for the Air Force, it's all centered on the planes, right? And getting the runway back open and after like a missile attack or something from North Korea. So that's a lot of the training that we did there. My other kind of mission there was clearing a bombing range, a practice bombing range that they had. And then I went to Laos to do the recovery missions from Vietnam. So remains recovery that they do out of Hawaii, Seal High is what it was called at the time. And also like presidential details. So I went to India and Italy, both for um, Clinton and Bush as part of the presidential support mission that EOD does. So my mission, especially even before combat, was wide ranging, right? From the base support to those different types of specialty missions that I did. But a lot of it centered on training at the time. Like I said, we weren't in an active war at the time, but it was training for that next potential, threat that we had.
Mm-hmm.
So after September 11th, it focused and we were getting a lot of feedback and intel from the EOD guys on the battlefield and women on the battlefield on what was going on with the IED situation. And that became like a household name after several years. So then we started training towards that. I trained for a couple years and then went and did that first deployment December 04, but mainly like the spring and summer of 05. I was in Baghdad, and you do all this training in a peacetime environment and think you're prepared, and then you get there, and it's completely different. My first mission was out in it was pitch black, nighttime Baghdad, people around you, IEDs on the ground, and nothing can really prepare you for that. But I spent the next 6 months learning and learning a lot through trial by fire, and very busy, very like high. What am I trying to say? Like it was so intense and so many like calls, and every day was different. And by the time I got home, it was just like, wow, that was super intense. And you're back in this kind of peacetime environment. And if you've ever seen the documentary, what am I trying to say? The documentary Hurt Locker. It's centered on, I'm just joking, it's not really a documentary, but it's centered on the EOD career field. And that the most realistic part of that movie is when he comes back from war and he's in the grocery store trying to pick out a cereal. And that was kind of my life after that, is like getting back and trying to process everything that happened in that moment. Then before you know, you're deploying again. And, as you're familiar with a lot of the people you mentioned, especially like special forces, they're gone for 3 or 4 months, back home for a couple months, and then just doing that in that high deployment cycle really hit a lot of people, just being overworked by the end of it, and then try to come home after their service, after the deployments, and try to process exactly what happened. And it's it can be really difficult for a lot of people, on top of those other issues you mentioned of the cumulative blast and all these other things, whether they're physical or like, my wound is very visible, and, we talk about invisible wounds, and, there's no way you can go into that environment and come back and think you're going to be unchanged from those events or your time there.
I know that, like during my post-combat trauma recovery, there was a lot of what the doctors and the medical folks were telling me I couldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
And I know your story, but for the alphas who are listening who don't know it, I know for me, I was determined to do everything that they were telling me not to do. I'm not sure this is the case for you, but I'm going to let you tell us. But eventually I got strong enough to run, and I found it so liberating.
Yeah.
Because there were so many restrictions, and I finally got around to doing my first like mini triathlon. Nothing compared to you. But anyway, I ended up running my first marathon and everything, despite what everybody was saying. So can you
Right.
talk to me a little bit about, were you into athletics and running and all that stuff before you were wounded? And what part did that play? What were the doctors telling you? Did you give them the old, no, I'm not going to do that? What was that like for you?
Yeah. So, I grew up playing ball sports mainly. I focused on soccer later, but I grew up playing baseball, basketball, soccer, football, like any and every sport as a kid I was playing, and then kind of hyper focused on soccer from about 8th, 9th grade on. So as you may know, with ball sports, like running is no fun. Like it's a punishment when you're that age and doing those types of sports. And then in the military, like they don't make it very much fun either. So, you're forced to do PT, however many days a week. And I was always decent at running, but never really enjoyed it or found that liberating experience that you mentioned. So after my injury, I lost my leg above the knee, and also I had a fracture in my femoral neck of my hip. So they had to put some hardware in there. I ended up having some necrosis in the ball joint of my hip. So it's where the bones die, and there wasn't a lot of blood flow there. And I was on some like injections for osteoporosis that I had to take in my stomach like every day, like an injection in my stomach every day. So I started that process of, my idea or my mentality when I was at the hospital is I want to do everything I was doing before I lost my leg. So I started that process of, that crawl, walk, run. And, it took me probably 3 or 4 months before I was even able to put on a prosthetic and start walking. So that next step is like, oh, I want to try running, even though I didn't love it. Like a lot of people at the hospital, a lot of the peers around me who were going through similar recoveries, were running and cycling and skiing and whatever else. And I wanted to do all that stuff. So they did a bone scan. One of the first steps is doing a bone scan to make sure your bone density is okay to support high impact activity. And that's when they found that necrosis and some other things going on in my hip that really didn't allow that at the time. So I thought, well, this is a great excuse to never happen to be able to run again. I didn't like it before. Like, why would I do it now? And, people would ask like, oh, like, have you seen that Blade Runner at the Olympics? Don't you want to do that? And I'm like, yeah, I didn't like running before I lost my leg, and why would I do it now? So I used that as an excuse for many, many years. And you're right. Like the doctors told me, like, it's probably not a good idea. Hip replacement and all these fractures and everything else that could potentially come along with that. And I was able to use that for an excuse for a long, long time, 7 years to be exact. And finally, like when I started to make some shifts in my life, I was leading this veterans group up in Washington State. They do this relay race, and I've taken a group of veterans there a few times. And on the 3rd year, I was taking a group. We needed a runner and couldn't find one. So these things were starting to line up in my life, and I'm starting to figure things out. And I decided to like try to take this challenge on. And I went back up to Walter Reed, put on a running prosthetic, got with my PT, got with my prosthetist, and just try to get us set up together and try this. And it was really bad at first. I think the fit and everything was great on my prosthetic. My issue was I hadn't done anything in 7 years, physically anyway. So I was like completely gassed by just like 200 or 400 meter runs. But I started from there, and once I realized I could do it, I was just doing these really short runs several times a week, and it finally led up to being able to run a small portion of that relay race about 5 or 6 weeks later. And I was like 5th to last, I think, in that section of the race. And I
Yeah,
was like,
but you weren't last.
yeah, I was very close. But and it's never been about that, like that placement or times or anything. It hasn't really been focused. I hadn't really been focused on that. It was more this liberating experience that you mentioned, and realizing and finding out something that I could do after 7 years of, like I said, not doing anything, and then finding this, oh, I can do this now. And I was told before that I couldn't. I'm realizing now that I can, and it's kind of like, what's next, or what else is out there that I've been telling myself that I can't do, or people have been telling me that I can't do. So that really opened up a world of possibilities and exploration and curiosity for me at that moment. And from there, like, I had no expectations, but I just continued to slowly put in work each day. And, a few months later, I ended up running a half marathon, and it was the Air Force half in DC. And prior to my injury, I had ran one half marathon on like next to no training with a guy in my unit. And it was right before I deployed to Afghanistan and lost my leg there. And, after starting in April with a blade and then working up to this September half marathon, I did a lot of training and was able to actually run that half marathon faster than when I had 2 legs. And I was like, what have I been doing all this time? So it really like just set a light bulb off, and I wasn't sore that time either. Like when I ran the first one, I was couldn't walk for 3 days, and it was just, obviously I was doing something very wrong in the past, and that instant just opened up so many doors for me. And from there it was just like, let's see what's next. And it continued through not only running, but other areas of my life, going back to school and, relationships and all these other things, that it really led to great experiences and possibilities that I really hadn't thought about prior to that.
It's a remarkable, Adam, and I can definitely relate to what you're saying. Even being in the Army myself, I hated running, and the military takes the fun out of running for sure. And then you're timed, and you have to meet in certain standards, so then there's like pressure involved with
Totally.
it. But it's like just you got to do what you got to do. And I appreciate you kind of walking us through that pathway. The question I was going to ask was kind of, what happened in the 7 years between, your injury into running 100 miles, and you answered it a little bit. And the question's really more about like the physical active running, but also like the mental barriers that you had to overcome. And I have a buddy who does 100K cycling competitions, and so every weekend he's out riding an ungodly amount of miles. And I'm just like, why do you subjugate yourself to this like pain and struggle and hardship and trauma? And this is what you do in your off time.
Right.
And for him, there's a long list of reasons, but it ultimately comes down to, this is what I get into a flow state out there, and I'm in like the greatest spiritual communion, like with the Creator in my own way. Like that's where I meet God, is out there on the road. So it's hard enough for a lot of people to envision doing a half marathon, a marathon, 100 miles. You're doing it with one natural leg, one prosthetic leg. So there's that physical barrier and component that you kind of built up into. But I also really hear emanating from you like the mental permission. Like you started to give yourself and set a bold vision for what could be that went against things that were previously like, I can't do that. So how much do you attribute like the mental as in overcoming that as a part of your success to accomplish what you did in the physical and beyond in your life?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. I mean, a lot. And maybe I can touch on, you know, after, so I mentioned like, you know, kind of after this running journey started, I started to explore and be curious. And kind of what I learned, or one of the things that I learned in that process was, you know, what you mentioned too is this like struggle or challenge of your friend. And a lot of times that kind of pushes us in one direction, or one direction or the other. And that's either to kind of recluse or come back and cower down and you know, have it take its toll on us and kind of beat us down. Or there's also that opportunity to kind of rise above and use like that traumatic or struggle event as post-traumatic growth, is, you know, what it's called in the therapy realm, and to really grow through those challenging times. So what I started to learn through my graduate education was like there's these cases of what they call like an oscillating family narrative, to put a like proper term on it. But it's these times in our past when, you know, if you think about it, if your family had a really easy time all the time and everything was like handed to you, you're probably not learning a lot of resilience through that. And the same, if you're always like down and out, it's hard to see any like hope or good. But in the middle, there are these times, and where I see my family too is growing up is there were some good times, and then there were some struggles, and then watching my grandparents and parents like overcome those struggles, and coming out better on the other end through those struggles. And then it might happen again, but they're always like working to overcome these challenges, right? And then that's where I see myself like flash forward, you know, months after I started, you know, putting the pieces together and figuring this out. And prior to that event in like January 2015 and starting running in April 2015, you know, I was kind of using that or looking at that as an excuse before, like I said, right? It's like, I lost my leg. I don't have to run now. I don't have to really do anything. Like I can live on my retirement or whatever that looks like. And, you know, life's difficult, but I don't have to do much and I can just coast, right? Even though I was like working at the time and yes, doing other things, I wasn't really pushing myself to overcome challenges and be better on the other side or grow through that traumatic experience. And once I started putting those pieces together and figuring this out, and then learning that like that idea that I just mentioned, then it is about seeking out selective struggles or you know, some type of challenge, and then coming out stronger on the other side. And whether that's through physical activity or education, or personal struggles that happen in everyone's daily life. You know, people who pass away or get injured or whatever that might look like. You both mentioned it in your own lives. And it's how do we view that? Is it going to beat us down, or is it going to help us live a more fruitful and productive life? And it took me years and years to get there. But I see those big running challenges that I'm setting myself up for now as opportunities to put myself out there and work through physical pain, mental pain, and try to just like figure these things out. And you know, when you're done, you learn a lot through those experiences. And in my opinion, you're better and stronger on the other side of those.
Well,
And
speaking
it
of
just
putting
flows
it-
in, and it just flows into like other aspects and areas of our lives, as I mentioned, and vice versa.
So speaking of putting yourself out there, I popped on your Instagram.
Okay.
For anybody, for our alphas that are listening, that's at EOD POPP. That's EOD Pop. Anyway, I was scrolling, as I often do, and I saw a picture that you posted on your feed, and
Okay.
it's just your lower half surrounded by a ton of running shoes.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And the caption read, "Dear Alphas, quote, looking for a soulmate in size 11 and a half.
Yeah,
In the
that's right.
past 3 years, I've put over 4,000 miles on the left and 0 miles on the right."
That's right.
And my question for you is, have you found any takers?
Yes,
Yes. Okay, good. And so you put your life out there. Your Instagram feed is just filled with really, really inspired pictures of you just kind of doing your thing. Have you can you talk to me a little bit about the importance of sharing your story, what kind of feedback you're getting, and how does social media play a role in keeping motivated?
Yeah, you had to scroll back really far to find that one, I think, because it's closer to like 12,000 miles maybe now. But I have found several people who are missing the opposite leg as me and in the same size. And yeah, we
Oh,
trade
wow.
shoes. There's 3 or 4 guys that I trade shoes with, and yes, I call them my soulmate because they're getting the other soul to my left pair, so or my left side. But yeah, I think I don't know. I hate the social media question. I think it's what you're seeing is my highlight reel, right? What you're seeing is a lot of, I don't necessarily share a lot of my struggles on my highlight reel or social media. And I mean, I do occasionally, but I think it can be dangerous because people see that and don't see all the things that I've just mentioned to you, or don't see, you know, looking back to when I was in the hospital bed and how much work and effort and time it took to get from that place in December 2007 to where I am like 15, 16, 17 years later. Um, and a lot of times people see what's going on now and like, oh, I want to do that. And why can't I have it right now? So I think, especially like reflecting back to when I started this journey, I would have loved to have more people who were like me and learn through them. I knew of 2 amputees who had finished 100-milers at that time, and I reached out to them. And that's part of the reason I like share my story now, especially that aspect of it, is to try to be the support structure for people who are trying to do this now that I didn't necessarily have at the time. And I think this community is growing, and we're seeing it in a lot of like prominent and bigger level events now, such as the Boston Marathon and the UTMB like Ultra Trail Series, and some other events that are actually welcoming and creating these opportunities for amputee athletes and para athletes at an elite level. But when I first started this journey, there wasn't a lot out there, and that's kind of my hope for what I'm doing and sharing now is to create that space of you know just being able to share kind of my progress, my story, and any things I've learned along the way to help the next amputee runner athlete get to where they want to be, whether that's on the trails or in their personal life.
I think you're doing it masterfully, Adam, and you are such an inspiration. And I work in the veteran mental health space and have for the last, almost 10 years. And what we find is, especially within the military, is because of the hazards of our job, we were just exposed to like some of the worst, situations that humanity has to offer. So it's like we get pushed more than the average, population, and then but it's all different experiences, but varying degrees of hard, challenging and struggles. And then that's just a very human experience. Like, to be honest, like
Yeah.
being a human at times is challenging, hard and struggling. And so it's not so much that like you're immune to that, but what you're saying is, what do you do in the face of that adversity? It's not the adversity that defines you. It's not the struggle or the challenge. It's how you overcome and persevere that. And one of the things, and doing a little bit of preparation for the show, like I've seen you attribute, especially in that first 18 months, a lot of the mentors that came into your life that helped really kind of pour into you, and helped you in that really pivotal time. Can you talk a little bit about mentor mentee relationships, whether that be something you learned or a specific mentor during that time, or how you're kind of taking it forward and you mentor other folks that are coming up? Because I think it's really important for our listeners to hear, because we have some really active folks that in the Legion that are out there in their communities. So anything you can add to this type of developmental relationship and how it can benefit one and others.
Yeah, totally. I was very fortunate, and the people at Walter Reed were very fortunate, in my opinion, because we had so many resources there, and especially what they call like Ward 57, where most of the amputees and some other injured were on that ward. We had so many resources in the forms of not only healthcare, but nonprofits and amputee peer mentor visitors who came there. So I'm thinking back to specifically a double amputee from the Korean War and a double amputee from the Vietnam War. And they would come into the room and just visit. And, they were really good at what they did. Just meeting people at the bedside, meeting them where they're at, and then either answering questions if that's what they needed, or providing a milkshake. The guy became known as the milkshake man because, he just came in and was very warm and welcoming, and could give guidance very naturally. And it seemed natural, but I know it was a lot of like experience and work that went into that. Um, and I was very fortunate for that. And I'm thinking back to the people who you mentioned when, they come back from war and they had these concussive events, and, they're going back to either their home station or getting out of the military and going back to, where I'm from in the Midwest. And there's not necessarily that support structure there. And I think it is very important for people in these communities to be those role models or mentors or whatever you want to call them in those situations, to really understand who's coming back to their community and what they need at that time. So I think it's two very different worlds from what I experienced at the hospital and all these resources. And on the other side, it's people who are going back to their communities, and people within that community might not necessarily know what the veteran needs or is dealing with or wants. But I think it is important just to explore and have a conversation and be curious about who that person is, what they're about, what they need, and how to best support them to the best of the mentor, if that's what you want to call them, ability. And I'll say one last thing on that Walter Reed experience is that Korean and Vietnam veteran. There's a national-wide organization called the Amputee Coalition of America, and they have a program that trains mentors, mainly amputees, but also other family members, to really it gives them the skills to be a good visitor. Maybe that's what I'll call them. Because I've had plenty of visitors who come in there and they're very well intended, but it's like, hey, we're gonna get you running again. It's like, I don't want to run. Like, what? But anyway, this organization like teaches the visitor how to be a good visitor, teaches them the skills to be a good visitor. And then those two veterans at Walter Reed developed one specifically for the military population. And I was fortunate enough to be in their class in 2008 and kind of learn those skills, those very initial basic skills. And then from there on, I've just kind of tried to add to those skills and learn and educate myself to be the best supporter that I can be for whatever that person needs. So that included, I think, as you know, but like the graduate degree in counseling, and then most recently the graduate degree in sports psychology.
Well, now you're just showing off.
But
No,
I mean, it's a continual. My point is, it's a continually like you need to continually be bettering and learning to, how to be the best mentor. You can't just do like a one-off training in 2008 and say, oh, I'm good. And
I'm all
and I'm not saying I'm still, I'm still learning and trying to be better at this, but
no, I
wasn't trying to show off.
No. You deserve all the accolades. I'm just ribbing you. But speaking of support and being a positive advocate in a supportive way, what kind of recommendations would you give to, say, American Legion posts across the nation or alphas who are listening? What kind of recommendations would you share to them on how to best support veteran athletes who are looking to use athletics as a way of healing? And how can they incorporate or promote athletics for their fellow alphas at their posts?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, It's a big question, and maybe I'll start with, I think the first step is being, whether it's for a mentor or for people who are leading these programs, is being an authentic person in what you do. So it's kind of aligning, your thoughts and visions with action, right? So for a long time, I didn't necessarily like align those two. Like I was thinking I wanted to be one person, but my actions were leading me in a different direction. So I think in those roles, like you have to be authentic in what you're doing. And if you're having, if you have values or goals or ideal self, it's really aligning your thoughts and actions with what you're promoting or what you're about, right? I think secondly is to realize that not everybody loves running as much as I do. So it's finding or cycling, like Adam's friend, or whatever it might be. Like not everyone's outlet will be running or cycling, or maybe it's painting or yoga. But really, it's like providing a wide range of opportunities for individuals, in my opinion. Because again, at the start of my journey, I tried a lot of different things, and then like realizing, oh, I don't like that, but that's just as good of information as figuring out what I do like, right? So it's providing these opportunities. It's having leaders who are like authentic in what they're doing. And I don't know if you can hear that dog barking. I'm sorry, but
We love puppies on this show. Go with it.
It's not mine, but yeah, and then just like providing opportunities, right? Because as I mentioned, a lot of areas throughout the country don't necessarily have the opportunities that I do in like a bigger metropolitan like Denver, where I live now, or Washington, D.C., where I lived before. It had some amazing opportunities there, especially for the veteran community, and linking veterans with the local community. But there's so many places throughout this country, especially like I always refer to where I grew up, a town of 450 people. There's not nearly as many opportunities or resources in that location as, say, where I'm at now. So I think, there's a ton of Legion posts throughout the nation that could be that soul connector, or one of the connectors in the community.
Yeah, I think I kind of hear you saying it's about finding purpose, in something, to be able to connect in. And it may be, physical, it may be a sport, it may be running, it may not, it may be something else,
Totally.
but it's something that engages you and helps you create a vision for a better future, where you can improve, on yourself and be the best version of yourself, so you can live a life of peace that we all fought for to be
Yeah,
able
totally.
to.
And yeah, I'll say one thing on that. I couldn't agree more with that sense of purpose piece. And, for, as you both know, like in the military, that's almost given to you. It's like very well
Mhm.
defined. And when we're in that environment, it's like I have a very clear sense of purpose. And,
Mhm.
the people around me know this, and I have a very strong sense of community with like-minded individuals. And again, when we leave the service, whether it's through our own actions of retirement or separation, or forced upon us like mine, medical retirement. I think the biggest thing for me was having that well-defined sense of purpose and community taken away from me, and really struggling to find that again. So I think your point's very well taken, in the sense that once we start to develop that and understand and pursue that, things start to like work themselves out. And it took me a long time to get there, but I couldn't agree more with that deep sense of purpose and finding that again after you leave service.
I'm gonna double agree with what you said, because I relinquished my service, after 10 years, so it wasn't taken away from me, and it was still really
Yeah,
hard, because
right.
it's like, you're in your 20s, it's some of the most formidable years of your life, and especially with, the 20 years of conflict. It's go to war, it's defend your country, defend your freedom, do it for your family, do it for your loved ones, do it for your brothers and sisters that are with you. Like, what greater mission and purpose, and
Right.
really in some of the most formidable years in your life, and then whether it's taken away from you or you step away from it, um it's challenging, especially with the adrenaline component of the job too, especially EOD, tech. And now, you're like, okay, find meaning and purpose in this cubicle, in this corporation. And
Yeah.
it's hard for us. And not to say that folks don't, or you can't, But it really forces you to do some soul searching and to say, okay, like I'm here, I'm alive, and I'm gonna live for X amount of time. What am I gonna do with it?
Right.
How am I gonna show up? So yeah, and then for you, it's running, and it's running a lot, and 12,000 miles is a lot of miles. So I think kind of on the lighter side of the question, what sticks out to you as one of your favorite races and why? And what was one of your most challenging races and why?
Yeah. Good question. So maybe I'll start with the most challenging. Yeah, maybe I'll start with that one. I I I mentioned UTMB earlier, but for those who don't know, it's kind of like the World Championships of ultra running. So it takes place in Chamonix, France. That's the finish line anyway. Um, but it goes through the Alps there, Italy, Switzerland, and France. And because it's the World Championship, it takes some qualifications and other standards to get to that point. So when I ran my first ultra in 2016, I didn't know, but it qualified me for the points to put in for that. So and then it's a lottery. You have to gain the points, put in for a lottery, and then get denied. That was like my experience and most people's experience. Um, so I kind of found out about this after, like, wasn't intending to do this, but after I realized I qualified, then I put in for it. And I continued to put in for 3 years until I was finally accepted. So it's like a long process of a lot of hard work to get to that point, even just to get to the start line, to get to this like pretty famous, prominent race. And I was dealing with some mainly socket issues on my prosthetic side leading into the race. And then people were telling me, like, just planting seeds, a couple like runners who I know who had been there, like, dude, that's so hard. It's a lot of mountainous. It's a lot of like technical trail. So they were just like planting seeds. I was dealing with a little bit of injury, and then I got there and it's like really, really hard. I was doing this 100K, it's called the CCC, but it took me, I don't know, 9 or 10 hours to go 25 miles. And I got to that 25-mile mark and I like looked at the map and I was like, oh, there's a lot more uphill. Like, I'm so done. And I just like pretty much quit. I gave up. So that was a really tough experience for me, knowing the work that it took to get there and then like not necessarily following through or being able to follow through on my intended goal. So it was like really difficult, but again, I learned a lot through that. And that's right before I entered the sports psychology program. And now like dissecting myself, heading into that race, I was like, oh, I could have done like these things, but it definitely weighs a lot on my mind on what would I do different now to be able to address those challenges. And I think I've learned a lot and maybe enough to overcome that, but it was just a lot. And I think maybe on the flip side, like some of my maybe what led to better performances was through that experience and then really like educating myself both through experiences and formal education in sports psychology. But most recently, I ran a track invitational 24-hour race in February, just like 2 months ago. And it's this invitational again. They're inviting the best in the country to come compete to try to make either national qualifying teams or world records, national records, age group records. So there's a lot of very elite athletes there. And I didn't necessarily hit the qualifying standard, but I put in for it, had an interview with the race directors, and they kind of, sussed me out to make sure I could like show up and compete. And, there was a lot of pressure heading into that race too. It's the best in the country, really. But I use that as an opportunity to really tell myself, like, this is going to be a huge challenge. There's a lot of good people there that if I show up well and show up and like represent myself well in the best fitness I've ever been, it's a really great opportunity to do big things in that moment. And I just put in so much work in some of the biggest weeks I've ever ran. But more more than just the physical component. I was doing like a lot of visualization prepping for that race, and a lot of just trying to like build up my mental fortitude to address some of the issues I experienced in France. And anyway, I showed up and had a really good race. I ran the 100-mile in 16 hours and 13 minutes, which is like probably one of the fastest times an amputee has ever run 100 miles. Pretty sure it's the fastest. But anyway, at the end of that race, the race director came up and was like, "Hey, I know you were really worried coming into this race because of, where you're going to be and who you're going to be around, but you like really showed up and proved yourself. And now you're like one of those people." And that meant a lot to me, but it also meant a lot just going out and making changes and seeing like the outcome of those changes in a really big way.
Oh man, so inspiring. And so you said the word quit, and I don't necessarily think of that as being a negative, because I think that took real strength to recognize at that time that you probably weren't physically or mentally or both ready for what else was to come. But and I'm a firm believer that everything happens in the time it's meant to. And I know I learned that from my own recovery and pushing my own boundaries too far. But I do love that you finished a race later and being the fastest runner, so well deserved. But I think it's also proof that not finishing is not failure.
Right.
That we cannot look at everything that we don't overcome in that moment when we want to as being a failure, because sometimes it's about that journey to that stopping point and recognizing where you're at and kind of reassessing it. It's an opportunity to learn.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
And I really genuinely feel like we've learned so much from you. To my fellow co-host, Adam, do you have anything else you'd like to ask our guest, Adam?
I don't say no, nothing else to ask. I just wanted to reflect on the last inspiration that Stacy kind of already summarized so beautifully. But I wrote down something that you said, which was essentially put in the work, do your best, acknowledge the opportunity that's in front of you, and give it your all, and the results will take care of themselves. And I think it's just such a beautiful motto and framework that's kind of emerged from your life's work in these races that far transcends, the track and running. And there's so much value in that. And there's so much value in your story, your hardships, your journey and path. And that path that's taken you on the mile after mile after mile, but to see how you're showing up and serving and pouring back into others in the communities that you operate in. It's a pleasure to know you.
Yeah. Appreciate that summary. That was really, really nice and much more concise than I could ever do.
Hey, Adam, if I'm ever in Denver, can I meet up with you for a spaghetti dinner? Because I know you like to upload.
Yeah, totally. I live in Golden, but right outside of Denver, and we're always up for hosting. We got a good spot to host, and yeah,
excellent.
We've got great trails around here: walk, hike, run, bike.
Hey, as long as you're willing to go like snail's pace, I'll be right there with you.
It's where I train most of the time.
So is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to maybe highlight for the podcast?
Yeah, I was thinking about it when Adam was just kind of doing that wrap up, but a lot of times my athletic accomplishments get the spotlight. And as I alluded to or mentioned earlier, I think the work in one area really transcends and bleeds over to other areas of our lives. When I started this running journey in 2015, I mentioned several times of like how much I've progressed as a human and an individual, and that really bled into many areas of my life. And one we haven't touched on is I met my wife, and we have an 18-month-old son now. And getting ready to have another baby. And that's something I never would have had, at least not in this like depth, if I wouldn't have started this journey in 2015 either. So I know the athletic side gets so much recognition, and I think again, I don't share a lot of this on social media either. There is maybe one picture of my son on there, but that journey and area of my life is like so important to me, and it's been so cool and a new experience for me that would have never happened if I didn't take those first steps in 2015.
Thanks for saying that, Adam. I can relate to that. And of all the things I've done in life, the greatest accomplishment was becoming a father 3 times.
Yeah. It's cool. I would have never said that 6 or 7 years ago, but it's like mind blowing in such a cool way.
I love that. Now
Yeah.
let's get that baby boy on the trails. Get him walking. Get him on the trails.
Back, put him on your back.
He's been there. Yeah. He
He's
watches
like,
me run on.
I've got 15,000 miles already.
That's right. He watches
Showing
me
us
on
all
the
up.
he watches me on the treadmill during the winter, and he like wants to get on there. It's pretty funny.
That's hilarious. Oh man. Be sure to post one of those on social media, tag the American Legion so we can make sure we see it too.
Yeah.
We are going to have all of your social connections linked to the show notes. And for any other information where folks can find you online, what's your website?
Yeah, it's just my name.com, AdamPopp.com, and I think everything kind of links out from there. Or they can connect with me through email there. But yeah, that's probably the easiest place to be a landing point, and would love to connect with anyone who is interested in, questions or learning more about their own journeys.
Well, I'll be on there and I will be looking for your soulmates. Adam, thank you so much for visiting us today. Alpha, stick around for some scuttlebutt right after the break.
Talking about suicide is hard, but the American Legion has joined forces with Columbia University to develop training for those who want to learn more about interacting and responding to veterans who may be in crisis. American Legion Be the One training. In the 90-minute class, you'll learn to understand the types of suicidal ideation and 4 behaviors that indicate imminent risk, how to use the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale to determine at-risk individuals, how to identify risk factors and warning signs, and how to communicate effectively with individuals who may be at risk of hurting themselves. Online and in-person sessions are available. Visit betheone.org/training to find a session. Learn the skills that'll give you the confidence to talk about suicide and be the one to save just one veteran.
Okay, Alphas, we hope you had a great break. Now it's time for some scuttlebutt.
A Stars and Stripes article said that the U.S. Army is slashing the size of its force by 24,000. That's almost 5%. And they are restructuring to be better able to fight the next major war as the service struggles with recruiting shortfalls. That made it possible to bring in enough soldiers to fill all the jobs. It seems really strange. Of course, doing my due diligence, I took to one of the most reputable places online, my favorite place of all time, Reddit. So I wanted to see what kind of scuttlebutt was happening on the interwebs. And I'm being sarcastic here, Alphas. Don't ever go to Reddit for anything reputable. But it does provide some fun, entertaining things like this. At Logical Purpose 9324 said, and in part, I'm eager to learn more specifics, but this strikes me as wrong-headed. Historically, it's always a better insurance policy to keep authorized structure, even with personal vacancies. How can anyone following the war in the Ukraine today do this with a straight face? Russia's impressive employment of engineer assets for counter-mobility and survivability missions is one of the biggest takeaways. A war like Ukraine has huge protection and rear area security considerations. I just don't see how we need less engineers, especially on a transparent battlefield. We are locked in an iron cage of our own making due to the constraints of the, quote, all-volunteer force. We need to embrace the Cold War practice of tiered readiness, which was informed by lessons learned during World War II and Korea. The Army lost almost 20,000 soldiers net between December 31st, 2022 and December 31st, 2023. But retention is great, something, end quote. Very articulate, thank you. Also, on the heels of that comment was this one. And listen, this person's handle is a bunch of mixed up letters, kind of like my password on my computer. So I'm not going to bother. But suffice to say, here's the quote. The Army 2020-30, 2020-2030, the Army 2030
In the future.
or whatever we're calling it these days, is billing the transition to division-centric operations as a shift to dealing with the LSCO. Maybe you can explain that to me, what that Army speak is, but Adam. But the cynic in me wonders if it's just a way to manage a skeleton crew. You can't really convince me that we need less enablers consolidated at the division to manage a contested environment in a large-scale combat operation. My feeling is that we are doing this so that divisions can cobble together PCTs, which I know that one, Adam, to deal with emergent requirements because we can't man actual BCTs at full strength, but calling it a division-centric model to save face. Okay, I have one more to share with you guys. Alphas, stick with me here. At Lucky Strike BH said, wow, if only the Army could change its disastrous up and out promotion system, perhaps they could have the flexibility to deal with shortfalls like this. It's really Lucky Strike BH that I kind of agree with most. Adam, weigh in here, please.
Well, I think, regardless of where you fall on this, going to Reddit for insights is always a good and comical practice. And nobody can articulate the challenges of the military that it faces. And look, they're complex and they're challenging and they're ever changing. But the insight from the community and from the veterans is always the best, because you're going to get the truth, and the truth covered in sarcasm.
Yes, which that is my love language. Sarcasm. Yes. For clarification, Adam, what is LSCO?
I don't know.
Oh, I thought you were in the Army. Well,
I was, and there's a lot of acronyms.
allegedly.
And,
allegedly.
I flushed as many as I could in 2015 to allow space for new things to come in.
Well, Alphas, I know you're probably sitting there. Whatever that, what is LSCO? You know what it is. Write me in. Tell me, what is it? Okay, Adam, what you got?
Send a salami to your boy in the Army. Katz Delicatessen in New York is the city's oldest operating deli. Its pastrami sandwich was legendary long before that scene with Meg Ryan and Billy Crystal in the movie When Harry Met Sally. I know you know that one, Stacy. The deli serves up their highest quality meats prepared in the old world style, a method that dates back centuries. They are sticklers for tradition, and they stand by promises made, including a tradition that dates back to World War II. During the war, the owner's 3 sons were off serving Uncle Sam. Their mother, of course, worried that her boys weren't getting enough to eat, like any good New York deli owner's mother. What's a mother to do? Well, figure out a way to send them a proper salami, of course. A salami cured in the old world style can withstand temperature fluctuations and shipping delays. And even if it does get lost and arrives 3, 4, even 5 weeks later, it's still good to eat. Once they perfected the process, Katz offered overseas salami delivery to customers with loved ones serving in the Army. The service became so popular that Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis did a skit where they sing a song, "Send a salami to your boy in the Army." Trust us, it rhymes if you sing it like Jerry Lewis. You can check the show notes for a link to the video to prove it. The tradition continued through the Korean and Vietnam Wars, and today, the nostalgic signs proclaiming the mantra still adorn Katz Delicatessen and are emblazoned on the shirts of Katz employees. And they still will send salamis to your boys and girls serving overseas in any branch of the U.S. military. Yes, even you, Space Force. All we need is your APO or an FPO address, says Jake Dell, a member of the family that now owns the Delicatessen. My father always said, wherever there's a soldier, there's a salami.
I love that. Man, now I'm really hungry for some cold cuts. I don't know why. I'm just feeling.
Only if it's 5 weeks old.
It's got to be 5 weeks and cured.
That's it.
I've been to New York. I need to swing by a Katz next time I'm up that way.
Yeah.
Never heard of
And I would say I would take a Katz any day over over an MRE.
Yes, but I definitely choose dogs over cats.
Well, there you go. Would you, however, be thankful to receive a salami in the mail, Stacy?
Yes. Anything. Care packages, I don't care what was in there. It could have been, some spam. Except maybe spam is the caveat. Maybe not spam. But I got some really great care package stuff. Pez dispensers were entertaining. I don't know why, but it was fun. I feel like when people put together care packages, are like, what would you get on Easter in 1986? That's exactly what we're going to put in your care package. And I enjoyed it. Adam, what's the craziest thing you ever got aside from salami? Did you ever get salami?
I never got anything crazy, but if I did get a salami, I think it would say a lot. I would feel pretty special. I feel it says a lot about the person that sends you a salami in the mail.
Yeah.
And I think we need more of that in the world. And I'd actually be interested to hear from any of our listeners if they have ever received a salami in the mail. What was it like? And did it indeed come from Katz?
Does it come
And
from
yeah. And if you want to learn more about Katz Delicatessen or place an order, visit the Katz Deli website, and we'll have the link in our show notes. And to send a salami, call at 212-254-2246 and make sure you have the APO FPO address of the person deployed overseas. And if you get a salami sent to you in the next 3 to 6 months, send us a picture. We want to see it.
Hey, everybody, this is my time to remind you that my television show on PBS is coming out right now. So be sure to check out your local listings, your local PBS stations for air dates and times. Why should you watch it? Well, because I'm the host. And I'm a Legionnaire. So give me some love. You can always check it out. You can stream it from May 6th online at pbs.org/show/after-action. Or you can go to the website afteractionshow.org. You can find all the air dates and stuff like that online. Plus, we've got really great resources for veterans. It's an important show in all seriousness. And I would encourage you to consider to host a panel discussion about the show at your American Legion post. For more information, write to me. Go to afteractionshow.org. And I look forward to seeing what you guys get up to. Adam?
All right, Alphas, thanks for listening. You can subscribe to our podcast or newsletter, send us mail, and guest recommendations at legion.org/Tango Alpha Lima. We'll see you next week.